Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Joshua Basin Water District Regular Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, November 15th, 2017. Have Bev lead us in the pledge? All right, Bev, would you lead us in the pledge?
Sure will, Madam President. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, well, that will be the last levity for this meeting. Termination of a quorum, Susan.
Madam President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No opposition. Public comment. This is the time set aside for public comment on any district-related matter not appearing on the agenda. Government code prohibits the board from taking action on these items, but they may be referred for future consideration. Please state your name and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Any public comment? Wow, thank you. Mr. Marquez, I do not trust you, sir. The consent calendar, matters on the consent calendar are considered routine in nature and will be enacted in a single motion without discussion. Any board member or member of the public may request that an item be removed from the consent calendar and acted on separately. Is there anyone have any problems with the consent calendar? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Move that we approve the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. It's unanimous, so that the consent calendar is approved. Rate study. This is for information and provide direction for the ongoing rate study. So I presume that's Alex?
That's Alex. Alex Handlers is here again tonight. I think this is meeting 3 or 4 in the series. Yes. Feel like we're getting closer, so that's the good news. So got a new presentation for tonight.
I think this was, or maybe we had an introductory thing at the beginning.
Yeah.
Anyway, nice to see everyone again.
Yes.
We had a good meeting with the Community Advisory Committee, Citizen Advisory Committee yesterday, and one of your board members there, Gary, attended and watched, and again, a lot of good conversation with folks. Folks, good questions. Your Community Advisory Committee, your Citizen Advisory Committee, wants to do the right thing. It sounds like, trying to fund what's necessary, water supply, et cetera. What we presented them is the same that I hear tonight. It's just kind of some revised rate scenarios. And I think in your packets, there was presentation, but there was also just kind of a 2-page summary if you want to compare the scenarios side by side. But there were a few things I wanted to cover about them, then open it up to questions. I'm not going to, yes?
I didn't get that.
Oh, not from yesterday. Oh, but from the last meeting I was here. Oh, thank you, yeah. The scenarios have changed a little bit since we were here 2 weeks ago, but not since yesterday. That's what I meant. I'm just going to skip ahead. We'll skip some of this recap stuff. Maybe in the beginning I'll just ask, before I kind of just get into talking about these revised scenarios, does anyone have any initial questions, issues that they wanted to bring up?
Anyone on the board?
I see that we're still putting in the best practices and phased approach with Chrome 6. And you do know that we don't have to comply with that anymore. We got the letter from the Department of Water Resources, and our staff did such a great job getting ahead of it. They said, gosh, you guys are good, you have a compliance form. However, it doesn't mean there's not going to be something. But I think we don't have Chrome 6 anymore specifically to worry about.
Yeah, I could pull it out of one of the scenarios. It doesn't affect your rates in the next 5 years at all, because the financial impacts don't happen until year 6, 7, and 8. So it's outside the initial 5-year window. And there's operating costs, which are pretty substantial for Chrome 6. 600 something per year, escalating every year. So by the time it's you may need to do, it might be 750. You've got a lot of grant funding that the district's kind of been applied, they could potentially be eligible for from SRF. So, that'll be in the outer years, but maybe I'll make a scenario that completely wipes the slate
Yeah,
clean, just so
we've been
everyone
told
can
we
see
don't
it's not there.
have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So, and for the public too, people are still saying, what about Chrome 6? What about Chrome 6? I want them to know that we're done with Chrome 6. Not that there won't be something else.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see Chrome 6 taken out.
Let me take it out
Where are we
completely.
seeing that? I'm not even
Yeah,
seeing
it's in the
that.
outer years, but it's still in the financial projections. I mean, but there's no cost, because it's kind of the grant funding in these years, and there's no debt service or O&M that hits. So I'll take it out completely, and we'll keep a version, one of the final versions as a backup showing what happens in the outer years if there is Chrome 6 as
Or
anticipated
something.
versus, or something.
Didn't Kurt send you the letter? Didn't you guys get that letter?
Well, yeah, it's deferred. I mean, it's not off the table
It's
completely.
deferred.
Absolutely
That
not.
doesn't mean it's off the table.
Right.
Well,
Right.
if it's not this, like I say, it will be something.
It
but they
is in
said
this
that we are-
5-year window,
Yeah, that
we
we are-
presume, but not entirely off the table. So,
Yeah, yeah, I think that needs to be very clear that
Yeah.
it's just
it's deferred.
deferred,
It's deferred.
yeah.
It said that we were no longer under any obligation with it. Wish I'd brought the letter.
I think that's temporary, because I think they're
Right.
working on
Yeah.
now
Yeah,
going
well,
through
they
the
have to
appropriate
revise.
process,
Yeah.
and they may come
Yes.
back with the exact same
Right.
result at the end of the day, but they never did the economic
The economic
analysis that was supposed to
Right.
accompany that, so they had to go back and do a redo, so I guess wasn't aware they sent letters saying, okay, you're off the hook, but
Yeah.
for now, I think
For
is
now.
the conclusion.
Okay, so, yes,
Could
Connie?
be that if we're deferred out with Chrome 6 for 5 years, there could be a completely different set of people up there that are making decisions about this stuff too. Elections and just folks retiring, so the whole environment can change. You can't really predict, I
Yeah.
don't think.
But that's clear, that's not in the 5-year rate increase.
Right.
However, when you go out for your next rate increase, that's when you'll put the best information together at the time, update financial projections, and if Chrome 6 is in the picture, it could have an impact in the outer 5 years, or something else. You'll cross that bridge when you get to it, I think is my take, but yes.
Oh, yes.
Just one. On the rate studies with the key assumptions, are any of those interchangeable? Meaning, say, on the recharge water purchases, are we sort of gonna be locked into?
Good question, yeah. Just because we show maybe 600 acre feet one year, does that mean you're limited to that? I think the answer to these are all no. This is just kind of putting in what are all the financial needs and what do the rates need to be to kind of phase in towards meeting them. You're not going to get to where you want to go over 5 years, but you'll be taking major steps in the right direction. But when you do your budgets and when you could change course and say, hey, wait a minute, this year we want to do a little more capital, or hey, let's put a little more money into the water supply to import that. You're always going to have the flexibility. The rate study won't lock you into anything other than, hey, these are the rates that are going to generate the revenues. And it's all a little bit of a projection because, no one knows what your water use is exactly going to be in 3 years. So you'll still have authority to make a lot of spending decisions where you want to prioritize your funds.
Yeah, so suppose you have $2 million worth of projects that you intend to do, and you come in, with final costs of $1.5 million. You've got $500,000. You could either push forward to another project or buy some recharge water. So, you have options within the monies generated. So that's always the board's discretion.
Question? In these scenarios, we do have this recharge water purchases in here. Is this 500 acre feet, is that an additional 500 acre feet? Or have we moved our normal 500 acre feet from the regular yearly budget to this funding model here that we're doing for new stuff?
I think this is total.
That's total,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, in scenario A, which is still that best management practice, ramp up the rates so we could, fund all the capital needs, get to 1,000 acre feet of imported water, as quickly as possible. that's in there, but some of the other phase scenarios, we're showing more of, it goes 500, then to 600, 700, it kind of phases in over time, although the board would have the ability to say, wait a minute, let's not go to 600 next year, let's go to 800, and we'll live with it. We'll either spend a little more, or we'll, cut a capital project, or...
Well, I'm just wondering where, if we're taking that purchase of water out of our normal yearly $6 million budget and putting it in one of these scenarios.
Well, this is all part of, the budget's included here too. It's just not spelled out in that fashion. I mean, every cost is not reflected here. These are just the key assumptions. And more recharge water was one of those things that the board was focused on. So we've pulled that out specifically from the budget and placed it here. Okay.
Okay, so we haven't created an extra $287,000 in our normal yearly budget?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
And in the current year, this is the current budget, the 287,000 for 500 acre feet. Next year, we start ramping up. Okay.
Okay, actually, I'd like to have Alex do his presentation, and then if there are questions, I mean, I think it's getting a little piecemeal. and
Into
I'd
the
like to have
weeds.
it.
Sure, I'll jump into it, but these are good questions. So we have some slightly revised financial scenarios from discussions with the Citizen Advisory Committee. I think we're getting close to where this is going to go, at least for the Prop 218 notices. This first scenario is always the best management practice, and there are some on the Citizen Advisory Committee who would support doing something like that, but there's also scenarios 2 and 3. Scenario 2 is the phased approach, and last time we had a little more aggressive phased approach, and then we had a scenario 3 was a use of debt service. Last time I think we'd stuck in 15 million of debt service just based on some preliminary input we received, and the advantage of the debt service was it allowed you to do all these projects in the first 5 years, but then you have this debt service that's going to go out 30 years, so you're going to pay for them over time. You do more now, a little less funding to do later, or you'd have to do more rate increases later, and it allowed the rate increases to stay lower over 5 years, but higher over the next 5 years, all other things held equal. Well, after some discussions we had with Kurt and Susan, and looking at what's realistic and what can the district do, what does the district want to do, it turned out that 15 million was not a realistic number. The district doesn't even want that much. They can't do that amount, and if they did, they'd have to hire all the contractors. Really what the goal is because these are ongoing projects that are going to have to be done year after year, pipeline replacements, booster replacements, things like that, it sounds like the goal is really to get your own in-house crew. Just like High Desert Water Agency, I guess they've got like a crew of 6 that does so many miles per year for $1.5 million. I'm forgetting the number, Susan, may you recall?
5 to 6, I think, for 1.5 million.
So they're getting a lot done, and it's a good crew, and I think that was kind of one of the goals we talked about yesterday with Kurt and Susan. Maybe here, you would do the same approach, because it's a lot cheaper if you can get an in-house crew to do it than if you have to contract out, and everything's a change order, and there's so many unknowns. And then you'd have the in-house expertise to keep this thing rolling forward at a reduced charge. So the district can't even spend 15 million. So we did make a debt scenario. We cut it down to 5 million in case there were some high priority projects that the district wants to do in the next 5 years. But while you're phasing in your rates, it would allow you to do more projects in the next 5 years instead of waiting to years 6, 7, 8. So just front load some of the projects. But the rate increases are identical under the scenario we came up with, and I'll show you that in a minute. A couple things just to clarify again. These 5-year rate scenarios, no Chrome 6 costs are included in the first 5 years. They don't include potential impacts of the organizational assessment or future union negotiations. We kind of started with your budget, which assumes full staffing and everything else, and escalated from there. Another thing we wanted to point out was that all these scenarios assume a partial drawdown of fund reserves. I know you had a kind of an in-depth fund reserve workshop yesterday, and I think what's happened in recent years is the district hasn't done, the level of capital projects that it was previously anticipating, so your fund reserves have built up a little bit, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing, but the plan is that they're going to be drawn down over the next few years while you're phasing in rates. So you can keep doing projects without having your rates have to go up a lot the first year. But they're not going to be drawn down to zero. What we kind of put as a minimum target in our numbers was you're always going to try to maintain 50% of operating costs, plus $1 million for emergency capital needs. So, that changes each year as your operating costs go up, but it works to about, a little over $4 million to, $4.5 million of a kind of a minimum reserve. And I know Susan's been working on a reserve policy. My general advice is, put in it what you need to put in it, but keep it simple and understandable. Because I've seen some that are so convoluted that it's hard to, there's different pots of money and money's moving around from one pot to another and no one can follow what's happening at the end of the day. I mean, some agencies have 10 budget categories and they're moving money from one to the other each year. You don't do that, which is good. So we just put what we think is a pretty good scenario for a target to aim for. And that'd be a good target. The Government Financiers Officers Association has some general targets. They recommend a minimum of 25% of O&M, if not 50, and keeping something for capital reserves as well. You can't have enough in reserves to prepare for a catastrophic emergency. I mean, we were talking about fund reserves and other issues yesterday with the CAC. But certainly, if you had a well go out, there could be $1.5 million or so. If it's some pipeline repairs, maybe it's less. If it's a storage tank, it could be $2 million. You don't always have to keep that amount of money in the bank, but you would have, between capital and operating reserves, you would have, over $4 million in the bank that you could, cash fund a well while you're working out the finances and stuff. And again, the big thing is, less rate increases now could equal more later, more now, less later, so it's always a little bit of a balancing act. To get into the scenarios, just quick reminder, scenario one, best management practice, 1,000 acre feet, out of the gate, $2.5 million a year for capital, out of the gate, right in line with the engineers' capital improvement program amounts. And we try to phase the rates, and even under this best management practice scenario, and it would require rate increases of 40%, 30%, 20, 10, 5. Why do the rate increases go down over time? Well, they're not really going down, they're compounding. So if you took same percentage year after year, 50% one year would equal, so many dollars. And if you did another 50% the next year, it's 1.5 times that. So we try to, get you where you need it to go while still phasing in. But that would require, over 150% overall revenue increase from rates over 5 years. And below that, we show the impacts there. That's not, I think, what the recommendation is going to come from the Citizen Advisory Committee, even though some of them thought this is what you should be doing. I think what was more agreement on was consensus for something along the lines of what's going to be scenario 2 and also scenario 3, which is a phased approach, with rate increases phasing in each year as shown here. It's 18%, then 16, 14, 12, 10. Total is a little over 90%, similar to the phased approach that we showed you last time. I think I had 15, 15, 15, 12, 12, but again, the 14% in year 3 is no less than the 18% in year 1. It's compounding, so the dollar amounts are a little more consistent from year to year. And then you would have the flexibility again. Do you want to put more money to recharge, more to capital? Do you want to draw down fund reserves a little quicker to get more money and recharge this year and maybe do a little less in the future? You have options for how you would spend it. And there's also options of working with Mojave Water Agency to assist in the recharge. They might want to bank some water here. And then in the future, when they wanted to take it back, you'd still have to buy water from them. They just wouldn't deliver it here. You just pump the water they already put in the ground out of the ground, and they would keep the water. Instead of going here, they'd put it somewhere else, which is not a bad thing. It means they might want to buy more water while it's still at better cost from State Water Project to kind of bank it now. And that could benefit for you guys as well, because I think you get a 15% free water whenever they do that. Again, just to highlight the impacts of this, first I'll show, I called it a typical home. It's someone who used to use 10 units, now they use 9. 100 cubic feet of water per month. 2/3 or so of your bills are below this level of use. I'm just making up, it's a family of 4, and they're using water, and maybe they have a little bit of outdoor use, they're not using water super efficiently. The bill would rise, I showed it in the bottom of this slide in the blue section. This is, going from currently about $55 to a little over $100 over 5 years if this was impacted. And this includes the rate structure adjustments, at least a certain round of them. Yet, it's a lot over 5 years, but when you look back over 25 years, that equates to if the bill had been going up at 3.9% per year. And if people cut back water use, they could mitigate some of that. Someone using 9 units could probably get by with 8, and pretty easily, I would guess. But I also made another chart here showing the low user. You do have a lot of folks in this community who are low users, whether it's, a family really minimal indoor use, or 1 or 2 people, could be on fixed income trying to keep their water consumption down. So here I'm showing what is the bill for someone who's been using 3 units of water. And you've got folks on your Citizen Advisory Committee in this use range as well. There, the rates would go up, and you can see at the bottom of the table in the blue section, currently they're paying about a little less than $35 a month for water, and that would ramp up to slightly over $60, so about a $25 increase phased in over 5 years. It's a little less increase the first year because that's the year the rate structure adjustments would kick in, but it averages, about $5 a month per year over the next 5 years. And you did have folks on your Citizen Advisory Committee who don't have spare money to throw towards water, but even they seem to be in support of doing something like this or more to help protect the water supply that you have here and the investment in the infrastructure. Probably doesn't represent everyone in the community because some people are just anti-rate increases no matter what, but I think if they had sat in the same shoes as your Citizen Advisory Committee and weighed the pros and cons, we hope they would accept the rate increases, understanding that they're kind of a necessity if you want to protect your infrastructure and water supply. But anyway, so long-term, their bill would go up, again, from $35 to about $60 over 5 years. That equates to less than a 3% increase if you look over the last 30 years. So that's pretty much inflation over the last, inflation's currently a little bit lower, but over the last 25 years or so, it's probably averaged, 2.5% to 3%. So the real dollar terms, it's kind of catching up for inflation. Scenario 3 is what I wanted to talk about also. That's the exact same rate increases as Scenario 2. So from my perspective, with rates, there's no difference between Scenario 2 and Scenario 3. But we just wanted to show you a debt financing scenario where the district did borrow $5 million, to maybe accomplish some more capital needs over 5 years. The rate increases are the same, just means you're front-loading projects from doing more in the first 5 years at the cost of having a stream of debt service that goes out there, 20 to 30 years, depending on what you did. Some of the benefits of that are, maybe you can do more projects now at lower cost before construction costs increase, because as Susan pointed out yesterday, she looked up the construction cost inflation for the LA area from the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index. Last year it was over 4%. So if costs are going up over 4%, but you can borrow money at 3%, or state revolving fund loan, currently 1.7%. It's like you're borrowing money less than what the cost of inflation is. But, that's a decision you don't have to make now with this rate study. I just was pointing out that the rates would support that if there were projects that the board wanted to do. And Kurt spoke with the SR State Revolving Fund Loan representative who said, yeah, you could potentially be eligible for projects, but you got to come to them on a project-by-project basis. They don't just give you a pile of cash to do whatever. So if you did have some more expensive projects that you wanted to use State Revolving Fund Loan money for, you very well could use that. if you wanted to. So there's no debt decisions need to be made at this time. That's something you can cross that bridge on a case-by-case basis. But one of the possibilities that you might want to get funding from the SRF is if they're going to include some grant funding along with that, in which case, even if you don't want to use debt, you might say, okay, well, we'll take your financing because you'll get free money out of it. And we've worked with some other agencies who have taken SRF funding, and even though the project might have been, a big project, they end up not drawing it all down. They say, hey, we've already drawn down 10 million, we're going to use our own cash for the rest of it. So if you got a grant loan, I'm making up it's $2 million with, $500,000 grant, well, maybe you take the 500,000 grand and you do another 500,000, you say, okay, we're going to do the rest with cash so you can minimize your debt service. I think you could do this, other agencies have done this in the past, but the program's always changing its preferences and policies. But yeah, that was the point. It used to be the debt was used to ratchet back the rate increases to a more palatable level in the first 5 years at the cost of what was going to happen in the outer years when you have to pay back the debt. But that's not the case anymore with a limited amount of debt, 2 million, 3 million, 5 million. It's more of, hey, using debt strategically if you wanted to fund some projects sooner than later without drawing your fund reserves down below what you think minimal levels. And maybe doing it on a case-by-case basis if you can get this state revolving fund loan money. Currently 1.7, maybe it's more next year. It's based on, half of the state's general obligation bond rate. And rates are pretty low right now, but in the future, as the state does more bond issues, the rates could rise, but it's been, below 2% for a long time. I think over the last 5 years, it's rarely been above 2.25%, so. That's just background information. So scenarios 2 and 3, same rate increase scenarios. Behind the scenes, if you wanted to entertain debt on a case-by-case basis, you could. But there's no need for, doing debt financing to try to phase in rates, because we're planning on phasing in rates anyway. So those are the 3 scenarios. Again, scenarios 2 and 3, the exact same rate impacts for all the different customer types. We're looking at 18%, 16, 14, 12, 10. Mind you, those percentages offer what's starting as a relatively low rate in the big picture. So 18% of a low number is less than some other districts I might work with. They might have a 10% rate increase, but if they're already paying $100 a month, that's a $10 increase, where you're 18% of $4 might be $6 a month. So it's all, sometimes I don't like to talk about it in terms of percentages, but it seems like everyone likes to talk percentages. But so that's the goal, kind of a steady, gradual phase. And one of the things that came out of the Citizen Advisory Committee was, hey, wait a minute, your water supply agreement with Mojave Water Agency, it expires in
2022.
Okay, not that long. Would they reduce your allocation if it's not used? We hope not, but nobody knows. They said they'll try to preserve it, I think. But one of the thoughts from the Citizen Advisory Committee was also, hey, maybe we might want to look at bringing more water in a little quicker rather than gradually phasing it in over the next 5 years. And we're going to take a look at what does that do to rates if we still kept the capital funding where it was, but added in a little bit more for more water imports. And they're not that expensive. The cost of 500 acre feet's, $300,000 a year. So adding another 500 acre feet, roughly another $300,000 per year. So this isn't millions of dollars. It's a little bit more to bring in the water now. And if you did that, maybe, and you didn't, you wanted to buy more the next 2 years, but cut it back in a future year, you could always opt to do that. So we're going to take a look at that, which might result in slightly higher rate increases. The goal for our next meeting, which is in December 6th, is to get a recommendation from the Citizen Advisory Committee. And it seems like we're narrowing it down, and it's going to be something along the lines of what we're looking at here. Then it would come to the board, and what you would be taking action on is not approving the rate increase at that point, but just approving the rates for inclusion in the Prop 218 notice. And then that would go out to the community, and then it would, be probably sometime in February is the plan, when you'd actually have to take action on the rates. And you may get more input from folks along the way. Some folks not happy with the rate increases, some who might think you should do more. But you guys, at some point, will have to make the decision. And that's the one thing I wanted to say is, no, this isn't the best management practice. It's not getting you everything you want within 5 years, but it is a major steps in the right direction. It's like, 90% compounded increase in revenues over 5 years. That's a lot, and that would give you a good, funding stream for capital needs, not $2.5 million a year, a funding stream for your water imports, enough funding to do your meter replacement program. And when that goes away, that would free up more money for capital in the outer years. So this is big steps in the right direction. And if you ever did want to what you put in the Prop 218 is the maximum rate increase. You're always welcome to adopt something less if that's what the board's decision is. And, some agencies, it's not the end of the world. You're trying to balance a lot of the needs of the district, what's the rate increases, everything else. And I know historically there's been a desire to keep rates as low as possible, but even at your Prop 218 hearing, if there was some pressure and you felt compelled to reduce the rates, I'm not suggesting that, because I know a lot of folks here understand the needs that you're facing, and same under Citizen Advisory Committee. But you could always, anything you do are big steps in the right direction, even if it wasn't exactly this. If you went 80% of the way there, you're doing a little bit less. It means you'll have to do more in the future. But this is, kind of a big change from the kind of the small rate increases that you faced over prior years. But it's almost like, you're facing a lot of needs, and you're trying to phase it in. But so that covers the scenarios, and I just was going to do a refresher on the rate structure and a couple of things to add to that, but maybe I'll leave it there for any questions or input on the scenarios.
I'll wait.
Gary?
Yeah, I have some stuff. This is, if we're going to do it in two parts, then I have some comments and questions. One comment is that I think Alex summarized the Citizens Advisory Committee sentiments well. I was impressed. I was just a fly on the wall. I didn't say a thing, and it was their meeting, but it was really interesting because there was really good dialogue between members of the committee, and also between members of the committee and the staff and Alex. And my sense was that there was unanimity about the need to tackle this revenue problem. There were some differences of opinion about how to get there, but everybody felt that we needed to take action to adopt one of these scenarios or a hybrid. So that was really good to see, and hopefully, they've been talking to folks out in the community, and their sentiments are somewhat representative of the community, I hope. So, and then also, on scenarios 2 and 3, in talking about that a lot, that became very clear to me that the rate increases are the same either way. So we really do have that discretion to borrow money or not, depending on if it's advantageous to the district, and still raise the rates the same amount.
Right.
And, Kurt brought up a few points about that, and, one of them was that he, and also Susan, between them, and one of the things we talked about was, inflation's at 2%, and construction costs are rising at 4%. So if we could get a loan for under 2%, then it might make eminent sense to borrow some money and do those capital improvements that particularly the ones that we can't do or don't do in the district. You could do those right away. And then since we would have, based on what I've heard from Kurt and others so far, we do potentially have the ability to do our pipe ourselves. And however, that's going to take a little bit of time to ramp that up, because you've got to hire folks, you've got to train them, you've got to office them, you've got to buy equipment. So there's a fair amount that you need to do. So that's going to take a little time to ramp up. So so that's a consideration in terms of borrowing as well. But perhaps we could borrow money to do other things. And then on the recharge, there was definitely some sentiment in the group, and I couldn't tell if it was unanimous or not, but definitely multiple members that we might want to consider looking at being a little bit more aggressive in our ramping up our groundwater recharge. Some folks were suggesting going right to 1,000, but I've been giving it some thought, and I would really like to see what it would look like if we just went from what we currently have and bumped each of those columns up 100 acre feet, because that would get us to 1,000 acre feet in 5 years instead of 7 years, but it would still, phase it in. So I would just like to suggest that as something to consider, and I think that it might be prudent, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future with water and our allocation, and that would just get us a little bit more water in the ground, in addition to that we would get through, put into the aquifer through the banking agreement that we're working on. So, let's see. And yeah, I did take notes on that, and you guys were pretty spot on the High Desert Pipeline crew. They're putting 4 to 5 miles of pipe in a year for $1.3 million, and I don't know what it is to contract that out, but I'm guessing that it's far higher than that. So
$500,000 a mile.
Right. So I think that's potentially a way that we can also keep our costs down. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Tom?
This is sort of like a comment section too, I guess, that we're doing here. The thing that, I had a visceral objection to the borrowing money thing until I thought about some of this stuff a little bit more, especially when I believe Kurt said something about how to get a pipeline replacement thing going, it would take quite a while to do that. I think he said it would be in the...
Couple of years.
A couple of
Design
years.
and environmental alone.
Yeah, and so in the meantime, everything, assuming we do these sort of in a sequence, which is what I think the CIP is telling us that we're going to do, it would be good to have money alone right up front so we can hit some of the things that may be more streamlined in terms of their process of doing, such as the meter replacement thing. I have a piece of paper here just to expand on it a little bit, wherein this is something from Kurt to the Water Resources and Operations Committee in April of this year, where he indicated that our meters were 3 years beyond their useful life. And there's some 4,500 or 5,000 of these things. And interestingly, to me, we had a situation some months ago where someone came in with a several thousands of dollars water bill. And in Kurt's investigation of the situation, he contacted Aquametric Sales Company in Riverside, where we apparently get our meters.
Yes.
Susan says yes. And, saying, is the meter an issue? And the guy said that a meter will either goes completely dead or it becomes inaccurate in favor of the resident. which means over 5,000 meters, we could be losing revenue because people aren't fairly paying for the water that they've used.
We are undoubtedly.
So,
Yes.
therefore, if we borrowed money and we attack this thing, which occurred in this staff report memo thing, said would be about $2 million. And if we could at least start on some of the things that are like that. High in the CIP plan is the capital improvement plan, are these pumps and such things that have to be not so much replaced, but they have to be reconditioned or serviced or something like that. That's way up there on the list. Some of those kind of things, we don't have to go through all kinds of
Right.
rigmarole to do that kind of stuff, other than borrowing the dough. And so I'm kind of favoring the idea of borrowing, because this stuff is not waiting. Even we're late on the pipe. In other words, something, this is not hypothetical, something is leaking in the water district, pipe-wise, that has to be replaced every 3 days. I scooped you on that. Kathleen.
That's okay, it's coming out in the January newsletter.
Yeah, it'll be in the January newsletter, there'll be mapping and stuff like that that explains this. This is not hypothetical or something that's over the horizon. Stuff is happening now, so we do have to pursue this stuff, but if all the bureaucracy aspects of the piping takes three years, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the leak rate is for this year. This was 2015, 2016. At any rate, I kind of favor the idea of borrowing some money, unless we can indicate that these rate increases that are going to be going on, minus the 2.5% a year inflation, are going to give us some money right away that we can use while we're waiting for pipe rigmarole to be concluded. Thank you.
Thank you. Any public comment? Yes, sir. Yeah, please get out, yes, so they can catch you on the tape, please. Your name and where you live.
Ed Valoran, I've got multiple properties. I believe there's 6 within your water district up here, more so in 29 Palms. And unfortunately, 29 Palms and you both hold your water board meetings at the same time. I'm trying to get a handle to understand this, and the list of assumptions is things like growth and labor rates and stuff like that I don't see. And I apologize for, just getting involved at this point. I was at Copper Mountain Mesa when they spoke this weekend, and there were some people gasping after you were gone, because they are using 2 or 3 units of water, and are having trouble as is, and the increase. And I also lived in Diamond Bar, and that's a Walnut Water District. Their meter rate is lower than yours. Their rate per unit is lower than yours. And so I'm just trying to understand, what this is, and wondering how I can get at some of the previous information, that the assumptions and, labor rate increases and items like that, to understand it. So I'm not trying to criticize it, I just want to understand it. But I see that those are very large percentage raises, very large dollar raises, and the 2 other places that I have water usages are both less than this, and Walnut Water District, which includes Walnut and Diamond Bar, and there's some areas of Diamond Bar called the Country where the partials are 5 acres. So, yes, the houses are more dense than yours, so you got more pipeline, but every bit of the water in the Walnut Water District is imported water. So they have to pay a wholesaler, so I'm just trying to understand. So if you could help me of telling me where to direct to get some of these questions answered, I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would start with the general manager, is where I would start. But
He couldn't answer questions I asked. Labor rate, I asked him what the what escalation of labor rates at Saturday, and he couldn't answer that, which I was disappointed over that.
We've got a whole packet of information. We didn't print it this time because I didn't want to keep printing it every time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like 30 pages long that kind of has a little synopsis. Maybe it's like 5 pages just hitting the key points of what words. And then we've got all the tables following there, and some of them include, the detailed cash flow projections and rate projections and stuff like that. So that could certainly be provided and give you the detail I think that you're looking for. It's not right here right now because...
I wrote
yeah.
my email address down on your
Oh,
sign-in
okay.
sheet.
Oh, okay. Then, and then there'll be some update. Those are drafts, working drafts, just keep that in mind because things are getting honed. But that's got all the detail in there. We just didn't keep, every time we have a meeting, we didn't want to just have the same packet of info with a few changes. So I'm just trying to boil it down to, what's new and changing here. But yeah, you're right, there's different agencies all over the state with rates that are all over the map. I mean, some agencies, the rates are so low, it's other agencies, they're spending almost $200 a month for water. Every agency's dealing with different things, and some agencies, everything's fine, they don't need to do a lot of stuff, they've got a pretty simple system, and maybe they're not investing in it. But there's a lot of agencies now that are, facing facilities. We didn't go into that today. Unfortunately, we did in some of the prior meetings, but when you read this thing, you'll see some of the stuff. A lot of agencies now dealing with aging infrastructure. They put stuff in, 50, 60, 70 years ago, haven't looked at it since, everything's been fine, but now it's hitting the end of its useful life. Some pipes need repairs, replacements. You guys have these old booster pumps that maybe they were designed to be there for 10 or 15 years, and now 25, 30 years later, they're still going, but they're going to need some investment. So agencies have rates all over the map. Doesn't mean that one agency is more efficient or effective than the other. It's often a reality of just what they're facing. And you guys have had pretty reasonable rates compared to many, many agencies I work with. A lot of people would love to have your rates, especially agencies that have been dealing with water supply issues and have had to, look at desal or recycling and things like that can get very expensive. But yeah, your rates, you're in the lower middle range now. At the end of the day, we think you'll be in the upper middle range. There's certainly some other regional agencies that have rates that are going to be higher than where even you're going with these rate increases. And again, I always say I don't like to talk in percentages because it's, sometimes a little misleading. Palm Springs used to have like a $10 a month water rate. So if they increase their rates by 20%, it was like $2. Meanwhile, the other agency with $100 rate, they do a 2% increase. It's the same $2. It costs people more, but no one likes to pay more, and the only thing we could say is you, the Citizen Advisory Committee and the board, you know what you're facing, and we're not solving all these problems in 5 years, but it would be big steps in the right direction. And if folks out there, no one likes to pay more. And your Citizen Advisory Committee, they don't want to pay 1 cent more than they need to, nor can some of the people afford to pay more. But they, I think, understand there's kind of a balance there. And, hopefully if someone could cut back their water use a little, they can. But talking about the water rate structure, again, this is more of just a refresher. You've got your fixed charge and your volumetric charges. Your fixed charges they were targeted at the last rate study to generate 40% of revenues. Because the water sales have decreased a little bit, the fixed charges are now generating about 46%. We were going to bring that back down to 40% in line with the last target, which will mean a little less rate impact on the fixed charge, a little more on the volumetric side. And then for the usage charges, your rates go from $3 per 100 cubic feet, which is about 750 gallons, to $4.50 for the residential and small meter customers. The big meter customers pay just a uniform weighted average rate. But again, no one knows what 100 cubic feet means. You put it into 100 gallons, it's the rates going from 40 cents per 100 gallons to 60 cents per 100 gallons, with an average rate of just about 50 cents per 100 gallons, or about half a cent per gallon. Water can be expensive because people use a lot of it. The other rate structure modification we talked about was a steepening of the tiers. Currently, the tiers go from $3 to $4.50. And what's in our kind of proposed rates is that they would, when everything's phased in, they would be a little bit more separated than they are now. So there'd be a little more conservation incentive at the higher end and a little bit less rate increase at the lower end. Folks who use the average amount of water, maybe they benefit a little bit from this. Folks who use a lot of water, they're still getting the low rates for their first, units of water, but they'd have to pay more and more as they used more and more. So, some agencies have gone to routes like this to add a little more conservation incentive, because if someone's using over 20 units, and they're a, 3/4 inch meter customer, odds are it's outdoor water use, so it's disincentivizing outdoor water use. And one of the things that was brought up at a prior meeting here was, hey, maybe the rates could be a little bit steeper. And I think your Citizen Advisory Committee, they're not opposed to having the rates a little bit steeper also. But on the legal side, there needs to be cost justification for whatever we do. We know there's already some things that, someone is only using 3 units, well, maybe they don't need to be paying for all this imported water supply to try to balance the basin. Maybe that goes to the higher levels of use. Conservation program costs. Maybe someone is using 2 units, doesn't have to pay for conservation because they're not using very much. Maybe the conservation program costs are getting borne by the higher users. And this is what a lot of agencies have done to, come up with a reasonable cost justification for tiered rates. And then we had a conversation yesterday with Mike Metz, the district engineer, talking about, how the system's really designed for peak demands, things like that. So that's, I think, the next element. We have to go in and develop a cost justification, and we don't know where it's going to end up or what it's going to justify, but it may end up being something a little different than what we're looking at here. But we just want to make sure it's defensible at the end of the day, has a legitimate cost basis, and we're erring a little on the conservative side, if anything. So with those rate increases, as water goes, when you put it in 100 cubic feet terms, it's going from an average of about $3.80 per 748 gallons to $7.82 per 748 gallons. So it's going from about half a cent to a little over a cent per gallon. Maybe that makes it sound more palatable, but again, people do use a lot of water, so it would mean, higher bills for everybody. That's it on water rate structure. Let me just hit the next steps and close it out. So I think we've, kind of worked this through. I think we're getting very close to the final rate recommendations, which would be, scenario 2, 3. It's the same rate increases. Again, you have the discretion behind the scenes. If that did make sense for some projects or not, it's, the rate increases are blind to that. You want to spend more money on imported water or more on capital some years, you always have that flexibility. But our goal is to come back on December 6th, as I mentioned earlier, first, see what the Citizen Advisory Committee would recommend, and then bring that recommendation to the board, and then soon thereafter, get out a Prop 218 notice. You have to get those notices. We need to know what the rates are to put in that notice. And the notice has to be sent at least 45 days before you hold a public hearing. Initially, we had scheduled this public hearing just tentatively as February 21st, but there's potential it could be a meeting before that, I'm not sure. But the goal is, whether it's February, the earlier meeting, or February 21st, to get the new rates in place by March 1st. So a little bit delayed. I think, you normally raise rates every January, and that would happen in future years. This year, just be delayed till March 1st. And the rate increase that's scheduled to go in place in January already, that's going to be deferred in light of waiting for this rate increase to go in place. And again,
So actually, the board already approved a 7% rate increase for January 1, 2018. So this, if it's the 18%, that encompasses that 7% that was already approved.
and that concludes what we wanted to cover this time. So I think next time is the time to make some decisions for what goes in the Prop 218, but I think we're getting very close. I think just a fine tuning is all we need at this stage.
Great job, Alex. Thank you so much. Questions from the board?
Yeah, the question, if we do decide to take out a loan, I mean, that's a big discussion we need to have with our community. They need to know that, they need to know if it would affect them, how it would affect them, would it be pros and cons on that. I think it's an important discussion. I think 5 mil is doable, but still is something that we're gonna have to really look at. And, you know, we're a community of about 5,000 connections. Certainly Diamond Bar in Walnut has many more than 5,000 connections. We get a little money in property tax every year. Our property, we have less properties in Diamond Bar, Walnut. Our property values are lower than Diamond Bar and Walnut. All of that helps spread,
Yes.
you know, the pain. We don't have those luxuries. And so we are.
300 miles of pipe and 5,500 customers.
Yeah,
That alone,
yeah.
96 square miles.
yes.
Yeah.
That
So
alone.
it's totally different, you know, circumstances, community, what we're dealing with. And, you know, what you did, Alex, was, because you put in the desert agencies. You put around the agencies that are really the most similar to us in your comparison of where we were with everybody else. And that was on page 2, 3.
Yeah, I didn't cover it this time, but yeah, no, we had it in there.
Yeah.
And this was for someone using 9 units, which is, you know, 2/3 of your bills are below this level. You're right, some agencies less, some agencies more, you're kind of at the lower end of the middle range there. But we expect you're going to go higher with these rate increases. You know, no one's masking that over. There are significant increases, but you're still going to be less than the agencies off, you know, on the right there. And other agencies are raising rates too. There's a lot of agencies
They have to.
facing challenges.
And I know 29 Palms here is less than us, but I've sat in on all those discussions, and those are agonizing, and they didn't want to raise rates. And we've all read the book, Death of a Water Agency. And I saw that 29 Palms reflected in that, and I thought, boy, if they don't get on it, they're looking at death of a water agency. And I know what all this is, they had a fire department as well, and that was a whole different thing. But, you know, we don't want to be that way. It's not going to happen here. We're not going to do that to our people here. And I thank you, Alex, so much. I mean, you've really put in a lot of time with this. This is great. Thank you so much.
Rich Johnson.
Yeah, I appreciate the report and I look forward to, you know, the steps ahead. The only question I have on some of this is, and this is with the imported water that, in the agreement that we may be doing with Mojave Water Agency, you alluded to the fact that we get 15% of it that's just off the top, and that's sort of free water. However, we're still encumbered by the rest of whatever we store. And so when and if that amount of water is called, we're going to be liable for that amount of money. So,
I think when we discussed that at the last meeting, that it was the board's suggestion, recommendation that we try to negotiate that out of that agreement.
correct.
And so then it'll come back to you if that can't, either way, it's coming back to you,
I'm just
so.
looking at current rates versus rates 10 years down the road, and there will be some margin in there that's going to obviously be considerably different. So how does that impact this, or does it at all?
Yeah, I don't think it impacts
think
your
it
rates over
does,
the first
no.
5 years. And there's going to be other things that may happen in 5 years that are a little different, but you've kind of got your rates on a course, you know, taking some good steps in the right direction. You may be hit with some new unanticipated challenges or maybe some new benefits, and then you'd come back, you know, this first 5 years is not, it doesn't get you from here to the mountaintop. You're getting partway up, and then you're going to reevaluate 5 years down the line and incorporate any changes.
Well, yeah, and I like the fact
Yeah.
that we're not locked into
Yeah.
particular, you know, headings that you had there for key assets,
Oh,
or
yeah.
whatever the terminology was, because I was just following a direct
Yep.
flowing with this and trying to figure out where we're going to be when and if we have, well, when we have to pay that bill. Yeah.
And I've seen it go different ways with different agencies. Often we like to look out 10 years, but you're only, you know, setting course for the first 5. And some years we've gone out 5 years and we thought they were going to need, you know, 10% rate increases every year in the outer years, and it comes back, hey, we don't. We can get by with, you know, 5%. So we've already, you know, fund their program. Other times, unanticipated things happen, and all of a sudden, oh, it's not a $200 million treatment plant, it's $500 million treatment plant they need to build. So we got to ramp it up steeper, but these are going to put you in so much better shape to handle anything that comes at you. And again, it's not getting you all the way there, but this is a big step in the right direction.
So remember that banking agreement also says that the district has to approve of banking the water. So at any time, you're uncomfortable, the board's uncomfortable saying, no, we don't want your extra 1,000 acre feet, because we're going to have to, that's a liability for us. You're absolutely right, that creates a future liability for us. Anytime you don't want to do that, then, then you just say no, so.
Just follow up with a couple of the other directors' comments, that, even if the CAC is interested in increasing our recharge, that I assume is part and parcel of all that. So I'm just looking at the liability down the road. 5 years is just gonna be a blink, and then we're on. So I'm just sort of doing a projection there. We got a CIP that's 20, 30 years projected.
30.
So just trying to keep tempo with that.
I think that discussion's a separate discussion
Yes,
from this.
I agree.
Because we haven't considered that future liability and some enormous bill due at some
Roger,
future
yeah.
point in time
And that's
in
why I didn't know
any
if
of
this was
these
appropriate or
projections.
not, so
Right,
if it wasn't,
right,
excuse me.
right,
And I can't believe that we would ever approve something with that huge
Right.
liability.
right.
Okay, we'll go to the end. Director Florham.
Yes, ma'am. Regarding costs, in this same memo thing from April the 26th, the general manager was talking about it's in the capital improvement plan. He regards it as a high priority item. It's a pipe replacement project. It's 1.68 miles of pipe, 8,900 square feet, or linear feet it says here. And that's in here indicated as in the CIP as $2.5 million to do 1.68 miles of pipe. So these things, they're extremely expensive. One of the things that about finance that it's a problem for me is how much we anticipate these costs are up front, but we don't necessarily know where we might get help paying for these things later. Regarding this project here, there's a possibility for matching funds, which means we end up paying maybe half of it then, in other words. And I don't know how well we can predict those kinds of things. And that makes it really mysterious when you're trying to decide what rates should be and maybe how much money you need to borrow, when all of these things kick in, what the sequence of events are, the order of battle on these things. I just imagine it's like a sparkler, a 4th of July sparkler, where you got stuff flying all over the place, and you have my sympathy when you and Ann Roman, our accountant, have to try and figure this kind of stuff out. But that's where I'm kind of concerned now, is when projects may start and when the funding kicks in. Some of these things I believe you pay for after the project is completed, you start paying for them, which makes me...
Yes, the debt service, right.
Yeah, it makes me a little bit concerned if we should start putting a bulge, out here in 2021, 22, if we need to put a bulge in our rate increase to start paying off these $5 million loans, et cetera, if it's $5 million that we have to pay off. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Holmes.
I might say, interject at this point, that the best success that the district ever had with applying for grant funds is our recharge project. It was over $9 million. We got 84% grant funding for that project. The reason we were so successful is we went out front and spent millions of dollars getting a shovel-ready project in place. Kathleen helped us put together a DVD that went to Washington DC that, was 2 minutes long, that in that amount of time convinced legislators that we had a viable project. We did all the environmental, nearly $1 million worth of environmental before we ever had a project approved. Okay? That's what it takes to get a shovel-ready project. And obviously, every one of our projects isn't a $10 million project. A $2 million project isn't going to have that kind of upfront money, but there's a substantial amount of effort and upfront money required to apply for grants and to be ready for things that are called shovel-ready.
That's why I'm concerned about our reserves and spending down
Right.
to any large degree our reserves. Because if we have to do a project, a $2.5 million project, and we have to have matching funds,
Right.
where is that going to come from?
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons I'm a little sensitive about our, $8 to $9 million reserve fund. Some of it, that's not even real because
Right.
some of it's restricted
Yeah.
and we don't have an opportunity to spend it anyway. We can't spend
Right.
a third of it or
Right.
whatever it is, plus the deposits that people
Right.
put here, that's $400,000 inside that, we can't spend that either. So it's not a real number. So if people see this $8 or $9 million reserve thing, why do you have all that money when you're charging, when you want to raise the rates? We don't have that much money. We really don't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You kind of have to, I think, it's an extremely dynamic process, You have a project, then you figure out what funds are available now. Sometimes there isn't any state revolving fund money available, so you have to go for stuff at much higher interest rates. Very dynamic. The timing, the nature of the project, there's grants for specific things. Your project may be a water quality thing, and next year there isn't money for that, or, specific criteria, the availability of money, the timing of your project. Many factors go into obtaining grants. Loans are obviously much simpler.
Yeah, very good. Director Hunt?
It's not going to be any surprise probably to you or the audience, but I want to talk about the tier steepness thing again. And I would like to request a scenario with, the same revenue as in alternatives 2 and 3, but with top tier or tiers steepened a bit more.
Yep.
And it sounds if I heard you correctly, Alex, it sounds like that's something that you're still intending to work on, but you have to get a better sense of what we can legally do.
I think we're in a position now, we talked for like half an hour or so with or maybe more with the district engineer to get their input on that as well. But yeah, I'm going to see where the numbers take us, and I definitely was planning to come back with a scenario that was a little
Okay.
steeper than what was there before. So maybe we'll have a couple of different rate structure scenarios. And the Citizen Advisory Committee also, I don't know, it was hard to gauge whether everyone was in support of it, but at least there was, one member who sounded like they'd be supportive of something like that. So we're not talking about a night and day difference from what's being shown here.
Right.
Just a little bit steeper.
Right.
But it's, again, the key thing is, at the end of the day, whatever it is has got to be, supportable on a cost basis. So we'll
Right.
make sure
So-
it is.
So just to add to that, well, first of all, I'm going to back up and say I wanted to thank you as well. I feel like you've done a great job of taking all of our disparate needs and concerns and sort of honing that down into something real that we can, use to, as far more than a starting point, maybe an ending point. So, so anyway, on the tiers, I did do some research, and I looked up the high deserts rates, and you had mentioned those, and right now their tier 3 is 92% higher than tier 1. Ours is 33% higher.
Wow.
So they adopted something much steeper, and at least so far, it seems to have, stood up. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go quite that far, but I'm just making a point. And yeah, right now, and also I should point out that their tiers, they have 4 tiers, but their tier 3 is from 11 to 28 units versus 10 to 20, so they go 8 units into our Tier 4 and their Tier 3. So it's a little different. So I started focusing in on their Tier 3, and Tier 3 is 92% higher than Tier 1. And our, again, our Tier 3 is 33% higher, and our Tier 4 is currently 50% higher than Tier 1. And I also wanted to make the point again that, approximately 8% of our bill payers are using 20% of our water. That's a huge amount by a very small subset of the group. And, in terms of justification, I thought about that, and that means that 20% of our operation time of our wells, our pumps, our boosters, all the associated costs in delivering water, electricity, the equipment wearing out, fully 1/5 of that is caused by the use of 8% of our users. So my point is, a bit steeper tiers, to me, just intuitively seem very justified, like you could legally make that cause and effect justification. So I just wanted to point that out to the board and to the audience, that it's not me wanting to be an ogre and punish people that use a lot of water, but just, we have a very, very reasonable rate for those high users right now, considering the demand that they put on the system. And also, if we think about water conservation, I think we need to push people a little bit harder to maybe not use quite so much. I know that affects us on the revenue side, but on the other hand, maybe down the road that means we have to do less recharge, so we get cost savings there, or our pumps don't wear out as quickly. So it's not, you have to factor that in as well. And I also, when I was looking at it right now, what you're suggesting in these scenarios as a starting point is that we go from the current 33% for Tier 3 to 45% higher than Tier 1, and for Tier 4 going from the current 50% higher than Tier 1 to 67% higher than Tier 1. So we're looking at going from 33 to 45 and 50 to 67. What I was thinking is maybe we might want to look at something like 50% and 75%. That's not a whole lot more. That's actually only 5.52% more for Tier 3 and 6.44% more for Tier 4. So it's recognizing that there are high water users that have big families, or they have well-established irrigation and they don't want to, cut off all their trees. We have to find a balance point here. But on the other hand, we're having a lot of use, fully 1/5 of our water by 8% of our customers. So I was thinking, just throwing, figure out there, maybe we could go to 50% higher for Tier 3 and 75% higher for Tier 4, and that's certainly a lot less than the 92% and 153% respectively for high desert, but it starts, and given that it's only 20% a unit higher in one case and 31 cents a unit higher in another case, I'm guessing that most of the Tier 4 folks aren't going to cut way back, because it's not a huge increase,
But not just because of that, but you add that with the rate increases, and it may have some impact. But you're right. We'll take a look at doing tiers along those lines. And a lot of the people are even getting into Tier 3, I'll just point out, they're not buying all their water at Tier 3. If someone's using 15 units, they're still getting 5 units at Tier 1, 5 at the next tier. So to the extent you make the tiers a little steeper, it makes the rates a little higher at the high levels, but also a little bit lower at the low levels.
Exactly.
So someone who is using 15, they're getting more benefit of the first 5 units than the next 5. Then they start paying a little bit more in Tier 3 than even more in Tier 4. But yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that and come back in just 2 weeks, I guess it is, isn't it?
Yeah, and
It's
I
going
did,
quick.
and I did want to comment that I had the same impression in my sense that it was more than one of the members. They seemed to,
Yeah.
as a group, my vibe was they were amenable to a little bit steeper.
More than not.
And also, again, it seemed like there was a general sentiment in the group about looking at being a little more aggressive in the groundwater recharge. So again, I'd like to suggest that we maybe take a look at a little bit more ambitious recharge, but not necessarily jump it up to 1,000 acre feet right away.
What was the justification for the fixed charge staying at 40 versus 46?
You know, that was the target for last time. The reality is a lot of the costs for a lot of agencies such as yours are fixed costs. So it comes down to not whether the cost is fixed, but how, as a policy choice, you want to recover those costs. You know, because you have, if you're paying for staffing and everything else, or the maintenance crew out there, should it, you know, some agencies might say, oh, everyone pays the same, you got to maintain the pipe. The other agency says, well, wait a minute, we think it's fair, you pay based on use. You're using more water, you're putting more demand on the system, you use more. So last time, we had kind of gone through some options with the Citizen Advisory Committee and also with the board, and we came out, hey, 40% seemed like a reasonable place. And that was also in, we did another, the last rate study. In order to get the grant last time, you had to have a documentation that you were meeting the
AB
best management.
1420, I think, AB 1420 it is.
I'm forgetting the law,
Yeah,
but it was like the
yeah.
best management practices of the California Urban Water Conservation Council. So we had done some numbers, and that was supported by that as well, because they want, for conservation, the goal is more money on the volumetric side. So you
Right.
pay for the use,
Right.
less on the fixed side.
Right, but we're static on the fixed cost for salary and pensions. I mean, that's gonna be there on a fixed figure.
Yep.
And so then, you know, you're taking it on top of that, saying, well, if we conserve another 20%, that's 20% reduction in revenues. So, you know, I don't quite see how we're not moving the fixed figure to keep pace with our loss on the conservation element.
Yeah, well, I think there's no, I mean, the reality is there's no correct number for the fixed. I mean, you could make it lower, you could make it higher, but it's almost like a policy balance. Where do you want, how do you want to be recouping your rate revenues from the customer base? The higher the fixed charge, the more impact on the low users, because that's a big
Right.
part of their bill. The less the fixed charge, the more on the volumetric side, the more the impact on, you know, higher water users, because they're paying for every unit. So, I mean, we came up with 40% was kind of like a policy decision last time, and it means you're recouping a chunk of your costs from fixed charge to help fund, you've got a lot of fixed cost of service, but then other costs, could be variable costs, and even some fixed costs are being recouped from your water usage rates, where you're saying, hey, you use more, you got to pay more for maintenance. It may be a fixed salary for your maintenance staffer, it's just you're opting to recoup that based on the level of use people have. Hey, if you're using more of the system, we're going to put more maintenance dollars to work maintaining the system for you, but
I
yeah.
was looking at something more revenue neutral, so that's sort of what plateaued on a fixed basis, and I don't know how you came up with 40.
Well, again, that's the recommendation of the
Yeah.
California Urban Water Conservation Council in compliance with this AB 1420, which is, you have to be in compliance with that, or, you know, taking steps to be in compliance.
Well, sure, that.
And this 4060 is one of those
Yeah, well,
recommendations.
the
And we
20
got two,
Right.
you know, $8.4 million worth of grants as a
Well,
result
And
of
that
that.
20% was, you know, $200,000-$300,000, so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's a chunk of change.
It could be a different level. I mean, there's no rule that it has to be 40%. It could be 30, 35, could be 50. And we see different agencies with kind of a blend, you know, of different levels of fixed charges. And in that survey, it's not showing you it's not showing you the full revenue picture here, but you can see some agencies have less fixed charge, some have more. But this is, I would suggest, more in the policy realm. And it's a level that seemed to be supported by Citizen Advisory Committee and last time board as well. And it sounded like one of the goals was, hey, you know, we've gotten, our fixed charges have overall gone up because the water use has come down. So you're getting less volumetric rates, so that same level, your same dollar amount you're covering the fixed charges, and 46, you know, isn't 40% now, it's 46. But the goal was, you're doing big, you know, rate increases on the fixed charge and the volumetric charge. Maybe do a little less on the fixed charge out of the gate to try to keep the impacts a little bit lower on the lower water users, even though everyone benefits, everyone pays the fixed charge.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
just to add to the conversation, and I understood that with a fixed rate increase, it sort of prompts a lot of conservation. So it's the same way as working the tiers, just in a reverse order.
Yeah, I think the whole bill adds an effect on
Yeah.
conservation in
Yeah.
reality, because a lot of people don't pay attention
Total,
to what the
yeah.
tiers and the rates are, but
Right.
they see what the bill is at the end of the month,
Yeah.
which includes everything.
Right.
And if it starts getting higher than they're used to or higher than they're comfortable
Yeah.
paying, sometimes that has an
Yeah,
impact
well, we were
on
looking at
folks.
high desert, so that was sort of where that came in.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, there's no exact right answer, but it's kind of it's more of, we looked at some different scenarios last time, and 40% was the level that folks were supportive of, and it seemed like that was kind of the consensus of the Citizen Advisory Committee, and, from what we're hearing here, we could look at other options too, but
I'd like to
seemed
see
yeah.
something that's at least static with what we have now.
Oh, like an across the board.
Right.
Can I ask Susan
does
a
that
quick
mean?
question regarding that?
I think we actually had that originally. Our first time we were here, we just did across-the-board rate increases, and then it was,
You
sounded
mean
like...
just
the-
apply a straight percentage to everything? Is that what, I'm not even
Yeah, oh
understanding
yeah,
what
you're right,
what
that
you're
it would stay
meaning.
at 46, for
Right.
example.
Oh, I see, okay.
And with that, we started that way, I think, in the original scenarios.
Yes, we
didn't
did.
know what the...
You're right.
We didn't get into the rate
Yeah,
structure
you're right.
initially, we were looking at the big picture, and that was one of the changes that had happened, was, hey, let's bring it down a little bit to 40% back where the old target was, but I could easily show you, yeah, we could easily show a scenario,
I thought
keeping it where it is.
I thought it might go the other way, so.
Ah.
So Susan, I think I heard you make what sounded like a pretty key point, in that recommendation, if we follow, because we've been following it,
Right.
that has made us eligible for multi-million-dollar grants?
Right. So I'm not, sure, and maybe Gil or I, maybe I just need to have a conversation with Kurt about it, but, we ought to surely explore that issue further before we would want to get off of that, path. I
Right,
think,
that's kind of
you know.
where I was going.
Since
We wouldn't want to
clearly,
jeopardize our
There's a lot of
eligibility.
infrastructure work in our future, and, the more grant money we're eligible to get, the more we will get,
Right.
so.
Yeah. As part of the team that was back there in Washington lobbying,
Right.
it really helps if you have a really solid case when you get
Right.
there. And a wonderful video.
Yes, exactly.
That
It was a
video
great video.
was awesome.
So I do want to point out that the way this works, once we get through this whole process, the board approves whatever the rate increases are, then we still, go through a budgetary process. So we then have an indication, because of the rates and the cash flows that have been generated, what amount of revenue we're going to expect. We also have clues in here about how much in the way of expenses we can afford, okay? So then we make decisions at that point. Based on these rates, and if water consumption stays constant, then we have an idea of how much money we're going to get, how much we can work with, and then at that point, we decide how much we're going to put towards infrastructure, how much we can, water we can recharge, and all the rest of it. This accounts for no other kinds of increases in expenses other than, I think it's 4% a year, is that the number? So we're increasing for inflation 4% a year. Inflation for public agencies is more than the private sector. So we're considering 4% inflation per year, and if a new program comes into place and we've got some new expense or whatever that is, that's not a part of any of these considerations. So there will have to be adjustments needed over time. Either we're going to have to draw more from reserves, or we're going to have to cut something out of the budget as time goes by. That's how it works, because the rates are set, okay? Unless we repeat this process and change the rates again, okay? So you still have that annual review of the budget, how you want to spend the money. This gives us an idea of how much money we're going to have to work with, okay?
Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to public comment. Mr. Marquez.
El Marquez, Sunfair Community. I try not to be frivolous or make comments in jest, but I am concerned about a lot of the community here at I am a spokesman for at least 10% of the ratepayers in this community. I never hear anybody talk about cost-cutting measures. And that's one thing that this district should be talking about. And there's a lot of expenses that go on that they say, well, our expenses are increasing every year. What I'd like to point out is that with these increases that the district has had in the last 10 years, 8 years of them have been at least 7% increase in rates. And there's a good percentage of the people in this community that are on fixed income, that have been on a fixed income for many years. And it's hard for them to go for these increases that you're talking about. If you're talking about 12%, 15%, that's a big increase for these ratepayers. And even though they're using less water, of course, the district is not having that income. But nevertheless, if they're, the income from the ratepayers is less, then the district should be thinking about cutting costs to make up for those less income for the district. But like I said, I talked to a lot of people in the community, and when they're talking about 15 to 18% increase in rates for the next 5 years, that's a big burden on them. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we should have waterless Wednesdays, do you think, Al? That would help us cut costs. Yes, sir. Please say your name again, I didn't get it when you said it before.
The name's Ed Vallerand, V-A-L-L-E-R-A-N-D, and I did sign with my email on your clipboard out here. 29, you focused on what I had to say about Walnut Valley, Walnut, which is rates is about 70% of yours, and it's 1943 for the meter. You focused on that, but 29 Palms, their rate study, they're going up 6% for the next 4 years. Last year was the first year. So they've got an increase of 6% each year, and their cost is already lower than yours. That's a point. And, like I said, I was at that meeting at Copper Mountain Mesa, and there are lots of people there on fixed incomes, and I know that my Social Security check, I get the same dollar amount every year for like the past 5, 6 years, and there is no increase at all because every time there's a 1% or so, the Medicare portion goes up by more than it, so I get the exact same dollar. So there are people that are, that are hurting out there. And there were people out there that were talking about using 2 units of water that were out there at Copper Mountain Mesa after the group had left on the next hour, of the meeting out there. So there, as he said, there are people that are really hurting. In a 40%, it's like, what do? You have water and you don't have any food? There are people hurting. So the information Alex is going to give me will give me a chance to understand a little bit better. I'm just talking from the feedback I got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we comment on these? Is there on the agenda?
No. Okay. With that, I think it's Alex. Thank you very much.
Thanks, we'll see you in a couple of weeks with
Yeah.
We'll be close.
Yeah, it sounds like we're getting very
I
close.
think we're almost there.
Yeah. And it costs what it costs. I mean, you look at what we spend to get you water, it costs a lot of money because we have a very large area. Anyway, let's not going to go there. General Manager, or the District Council's report.
I have no report tonight.
Thank you. Susan, do you have a General Manager's report?
I don't know.
Thanks, Alex. See you in a couple weeks.
Thank you, nice to see everybody.
Bye, Alex.
Thank you.
Did you say you don't have anything?
I don't know.
Okay. Item number 10, district reports on meetings attended, comments, and future agenda items. We'll start at the other end, Director Sloan. And I haven't forgotten you, Kathy.
You and Alex work good together, I like it.
Oh, yeah, I like him.
You know,
We,
you guys work good together, don't you?
Yeah.
Just this last week here, actually, was it day before yesterday, we went to the, Monday, we went to the Association of San Bernardino County Special Districts. And it was interesting, we had Ober Nolte, he's a 33rd District Assemblyman. He kind of covers the north half of San Bernardino County. It's a huge district. And one of the things that he commented on was how the way they describe bills that they vote on, and also some things that are contained in the bills, where they say they're going to pay for a new thermos bottle or some such thing, and it's X amount of money. Well, a large or some portion of that X amount of money does not actually go to buying the thermos bottle. It tends to go into the general fund, which they use for all kinds of things. And so he has to then scramble around and try and make corrections and all of those kinds of things, and repair these bills so that the money rightly goes to what the people voted. It could have even been a proposition where the people rightly voted for something. That's where the money should go. And it comes to mind with some of the things, one thing in particular that Director Hund has been saying, I think he said it about twice, and that is that when we do implement some sort of rate increases or borrow money or whatever we do, in the end, we should be making a special effort through Kathleen, the community outreach person, and others to make sure that the progress that we're making on repairing and rebuilding the district is visible to the people that are paying these new and higher rates. And because if we have an Assemblyman, Oberholtz,
Ober Nolte.
thank you, saying these kinds of things, it's in people's mind, where's the money going, which of course it is anyway, and I think it would just be nice if we did make that special effort to document the progress we're making, whether if we have to run a drone over the piping processes that we're doing, or lots of
idea.
extra photography, livening up the website, so that there's fresh stuff all the time. People are going to want to log on to the website so they can see what's new, kind of a thing. Make it, add a currency to this thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hunks. Any meetings? Anything you want to say?
No meetings, but a couple things I want to say briefly. One, I think that the point has really been made here tonight by one of our public speakers and at other meetings that, we have to be incredibly sensitive to the fact that we do have a number of people that are on fixed income. So on the other hand, though, we have a tremendous amount of backlog in needs in this district, and that backlog is of a nature that it could really affect our ability to deliver water in the future. So that's the horns of our dilemma, right? And so we have to do it, but we have to do it thoughtfully and carefully, and I think that's why we do need to drill down a little bit on things like tiers, because if you steepen the tiers a bit, that could give people relief at the lower end, and the same people that are using more water would benefit from those lower rates for their first units as well. So I think it's really important that we really think about this and carefully, and think about how to do it fairly for all of our ratepayers. I also wanted to point out, and I've been meaning to try to find out what the latest status is on it, but state legislation was passed for the purpose of providing financial assistance to people on limited incomes for their water bills, just like they currently get assistance with electric and gas bills. So hopefully we'll see that come to fruition, and that will, assist people in dealing with these rate increases. And I do want to add that I think people do need time to adjust. I think they need time to work the rate increases into their budget, because I think even though people do have some discretionary income, some people don't have very much at all, and so even a small increase in their water bill could be a stressor. And I think by phasing in the increases, will accomplish that while still making great strides toward addressing our financial needs. We need to do it. I think we just need to do it in a way that is thoughtful to the ratepayers. And Kurt made a comment about something that Jim Ventura said, and essentially I'm saying it in my own words, but he was saying that it's really not the ratepayers' fault that we have such a big gap between our funding and our revenue needs. And so I think for that reason that we should not be quite so abrupt as best management practices in reaching our goals, even though I would love to do that, because this money is money that we need. These are very real needs. I'm very convinced of that, and I hope that people understand that we're not raising rates for the heck of it. It's because we're in desperate need of modernizing our infrastructure in this district. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Johnson.
I think the Senate bill you're referring to is AB 104, and, yeah, the Assembly bill, and I haven't heard anything anymore. It would be interesting to see how that's all gonna dovetail into our budget and our plans.
No, it's
here.
another bill. No, the bill that Director Roberts is referring to, that was passed 3 years ago, and the State Water Resources Control Board was ordered to come out with a report in January of 2018 that would develop a funding program to assist people who have a low income threshold, to assist them in a rate setting assistance. And they were ordered to work with the State Board of Equalization to come up with a financing program and develop a fund for the kind of assistance that's absolutely needed, especially out here.
And I'm making the assumption.
And aren't they talking about taxing?
Well, that's another bill.
That's what the State Board of Equalization is, sales tax.
That's another bill, and then it gets confused with the rate assistance program that I was just speaking of. There is another bill that became a 2-year bill that started out last year, and that's for developing a fund for disadvantaged communities to help fund capital improvement projects. That incurred serious opposition from our dear Aqua, of all agencies, because they were suggesting, if I recall correctly, that they were concerned with the bill because it directed all funding mechanisms just for the state and ignored the contributions by federal government. And they wanted it to be drafted to have a broader spectrum of financial contributions. But that's an active bill. It's a 2-year bill. It's different from the rate setting assistance program that Robert referred to.
Right.
But all these programs are moving. I look for good and exciting things to happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Well, I'm always concerned who's gonna fund them, and that's sort of
Sure.
where I was looking at.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We talk about the budget, and probably will be, and that, so I appreciate the participation with everybody with the rate schedule. I think this has been great. I think, obviously it's a dialogue. Comment, Mr. Marquez, on cost-cutting measures, I think certainly is probably in line. We see a lot of things that we might be able to do differently, best practices with that. And once again, thanks to the men and women in uniform and all those first responders.
Okay, Sheriff Barger.
We certainly are very sensitive to people on low and fixed income. I understand that one very well myself. And I'd like to thank our Citizens Advisory Council. They're doing a fantastic job. And I mean, in these past few years, they have really done a great job. They're so conscientious. And I know Kathleen, you are coming up here, but I wanted to direct people back to the recent insert that was in your bill this month, which was all the way that we have saved money for this district.
It's not even all of them.
Not even all of them.
I ran out of space.
And we cut to the bone as it is, and if we spend money, it's because we actually really have to. You have to maintain and upgrade and all that. And I know Tom's, let's do more on the website. Kathleen has allotted only so many hours as part of her contract. So we have to bear in mind that as well. And yes, like I say, back again to the rates. Gasoline tax got added on. Southern California Edison is raising its rates and changing its whole structure of time of use, which will now be for when people are actually home from work and want to, in the dishwasher, do laundry, watch TV with the kids, turn on the lights. So, and this one, we had a 2.5-hour workshop yesterday on reserves and a reserve policy. So we are looking at everything, keep this agency viable, well-run, working for the people that we're supplying water to. And then next week, we're actually having another meeting for our organization assessment, for people that we need to hire, for jobs that we need to fill here in the water district. So we're really looking at everything, and we understand if we don't make these choices now, something really bad could happen, and we will not be prepared. And that should be all of our concern.
Thank you. And with that, we will go to the public outreach consultant, Ms. Radnich.
Real quick, we are closed Thanksgiving, Thursday, and the Friday right after, November 23rd and 24th, just a reminder. And we only have 2 more Saturdays left at the farmer's market teaching about winterizing, because if you don't like big water bills, you want to winterize. It's not pretty what happens if your pipe breaks. And old pipes that haven't broken are just waiting to surprise you. So thank you very much. Come see us at the market. 2 more Saturdays. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Kathleen, it's possible there's a freeze this week. We're gonna have, yeah,
Oh, you're kidding.
midweek, we're supposed to have some
No.
really low temperatures.
I just
33,
No, I just love.
well, according to Dallas Rains.
Okay, see? Winterize, everyone.
Wrap their pipes.
Believe me, the cost of not winterizing is outrageous. Thanks, Kathleen. All right, future director meetings. The Mojave Water Agency Board Director meeting is tomorrow at 3:30. I was supposed to report on the fact I went to their last meeting. As of January, they'll be at 9:30 a.m. So tomorrow, though, it will be at 3:30. I'm taking that for Rebecca. Finance Committee is November 20th. That's Vice President Johnson and Director Flowen. Water Resources and Operations is right after that. That is me and Vice President Johnson. Aqua Conference is November 27th through the December 1st. That is the meeting of all the water agencies in California. Some of us are going, I'm going, Bob is going, Rebecca's going, Tom's going, Gary's not. And Nolan, I think a couple of staff people are going, but it's a very valuable way to meet other people and see what's happening around the water world. And I just want to point out to Al that every board, I've been on the boards now since 2008, and every board kicks it down for another board to deal with.
Thank you.
At some point, it's got to stop, and we've got to take care of our system, or it's going to blow up on us, and you will not get any water. So you need to remember, it costs what it costs, and we do everything we can to save money, but you've got to pay to maintain your system. And with that, do we have a motion for adjournment?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor? Aye. We're out of here for this.